Good afternoon. My name is Stephen Betts, and I'm giving you a brief overview of special education history and the law for parents. This can be a confusing field, so what's this presentation about? The presentation will include the following: a brief history of special education in the United States, 3 cases that help further special education law, 3 websites that can be used to follow special education laws, and cases concerning individuals with disabilities and special education. Let's start with special education before Brown versus the Board of Education. Many schools and states were trying to keep disabled children out of public schools. For example, in 1934, the Wisconsin Supreme Court upheld a decision where a disabled child was expelled that had been educated in school up until the 5th grade. Disabled students were not receiving the same high-quality education as other students. This would lead to Brown versus the Board of Education in 1954. Linda Brown was denied access to a Topeka white school. Oliver Brown filed suit claiming that the black and white facilities were not equal. Future Supreme Court Justice Thurgood Marshall would argue that segregation was illegal all the way to the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court would vote unanimously that segregation violated the 14th Amendment and was unconstitutional. Chief Justice Earl Warren would further state that segregation had no place in public schools. The decision would give handicapped right groups the necessary backing to challenge current state education laws excluding the disabled. This would lead to Park versus the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. In 1971, the Pennsylvania Association for Retarded Children sued the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania on behalf of mentally retarded students, claiming that mentally retarded students were not receiving the same quality of education as general education students. United States District Court Judge Masterson would rule that the state of Pennsylvania's education laws were unconstitutional and that Pennsylvania must provide free education to all children. This would lead, cases similar to Park versus Pennsylvania would lead to the passing of the Education of All Handicapped Children Act of 1975. The law required that all states to provide free education to children with disabilities and provide federal funding to states in compliance, established the first education plan, and established procedures to safeguard for the equal education of all children with disability. There would be a third case where Smith versus Robinson. Rhode Island refused to pay for a cerebral palsy child's place in special education. The case was won, and the plaintiffs then sued for legal fees. The case would reach the United States Supreme Court. The court ruled against the plaintiff because the law did not allow for the recovery of legal fees. This case would lead to Congress to change the law in 1986. From 1986 to 2004. In 1986, the Handicapped Children's Protection Act would pass, allowing parents of handicapped children to recover legal fees if the court ruled in their favor. In 1986, the Education of Handicap Amendment passed, allowing the creation of education programs for students with disabilities. In 1990, the Individuals with Disabilities Act would pass, IDA, adding traumatic brain injuries and autism to be added to the disability categories, added transition requirements for handicapped students 16 or older, and stated that the states were not immune to lawsuits due to the violation of IDA under the 11th Amendment of the Constitution. In 1997, the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act Amendment were passed, which added new IEP contents and changed the participants of the IEP team, added new disciplinary procedures, and required states to offer parents third-party mediation before proceeding to court. In 2004, the Individuals with Disabilities Education Improvement Act was passed, which eliminated short-term goals for all but the severely disabled students. in the IEP process, defined what a highly qualified special education teacher is, and established a model for right to intervention. Now that we've discussed the history of special education, parents and teachers need to keep up with special education law. Here are 3 websites I recommend. The Americans with Disability Act website at www.ada.gov. This is a wonderful site because it does include the most up-to-date cases that are being tried about violations with the Americans with Disability Act. Parent information and resources at www.parentcenterhub.org. It's another one that keeps up with current cases and advocates for the parents. And for us in Georgia, Parent to Parent of Georgia at www.p2ga.org. That's a great site. I have used it myself to conduct research during for the state of Georgia and what laws and court procedures are going on there for special education. This concludes my presentation. I hope you've enjoyed it. Following are my references. You have a great day.